The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined by Douglas Valentine, who is the author of groundbreaking books such as The Phoenix Program, America's Use of Terror in Vietnam, and more recently, The CIA as Organized Crime, How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World. We'll be discussing how America's surveillance and police state was developed in a way back in Vietnam, and how deep events, perhaps such as 9/11 and now COVID-19, are perhaps accelerating deployment of these national security state systems. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Valentine.
Thank you for having me on your show. I hope I can contribute something.
I think you definitely will. Now, you've written some astounding books, such as The Phoenix Program. It uncovers a shocking CIA rendition, assassination, extermination program of civilians developed and perfected in 1960s and 70s in Vietnam. The development and deployment of these techniques and technologies have continued well beyond Vietnam, onto war zones across the world and onto the streets of America itself. So perhaps to give our listeners a bit of a background, I don't think too many have know about the Phoenix Program. And so when I used to teach at university, I would mention it to my students. And so can you give us a brief explanation of, what was the Phoenix Program before we look at how it's, being applied today?
Okay, the Phoenix Program was created by the CIA in South Vietnam in 1967. And at the time, American forces had been in the country for about 2 years. The American military, Americans had been fighting mostly the North Vietnamese who were coming down from along what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and Cambodia, and coming over the Central Highlands and coming into South Vietnam to fight main force wars, battles, tanks and machine guns and soldiers, like in Platoon, the Oliver Stone movie, just combat. But at the same time, the Americans could not win over the South Vietnamese population politically. And they were, the South Vietnamese population was supporting Viet Cong guerrillas who did not have much to do with the North Vietnamese army. These were irregulars, people who had formed their own military units and were waging guerrilla warfare against Americans in South Vietnam, and of course South Vietnamese politicians and doing all sorts of things that guerrillas do. And so they were supported. The guerrillas were supported by what was by a political apparatus, which the United States referred to as the secret government. The United States was supporting the president of South Vietnam, a military general named Thieu, and at the same and he had representatives spread throughout the country. In the provinces, there were 44 provinces, and they had a province leader in each province that reported back to President Thieu and affected American policies in the provinces. Well, at the same time, this secret government, which supported the Viet Cong insurgency, they also had leaders in every province. And they had leaders, political leaders in every district. But these people were operating undercover because it was, they were secret agents. And they had this clandestine secret apparatus set up throughout the country that was supporting the guerrillas. And the CIA developed the Phoenix Program in 1967 to destroy that secret government, that secret apparatus of basically civilians in political positions who were supporting the war effort in South Vietnam. And the principal way, there were a couple of principal ways of doing that. But the part that really becomes transferable to the United States is that the thing they had to do was to identify the members of this secret organization. Who are the members of this secret government? And they called them the Viet Cong infrastructure. And so the United States, through the Phoenix program, set up a surveillance system over everything, over every facet of South Vietnamese life. It began with everybody in South Vietnam having to have like an identification card. And on that identification card was every piece of conceivable information about you and your family. That way they could know if somebody had a reason to travel outside their district or outside their village or outside their province. And as soon as somebody started behaving in a way that, suggested that they might be part of this secret government, then the special branch of the South Vietnamese government, which was like our FBI, and which had been created by the CIA, by the way, would start surveilling a person, and they would secretly conduct operations against this person. They would follow them around. They would bug their home, things like that, and until they thought that, well, maybe this is a guy in that apparatus, and then the first thing they try to do is to recruit him. Okay, which you have to understand here in the United States when I start talking about Phoenix-style operations here in the United States. The most important thing that the government wants to do once it identifies somebody as a dissident or somebody who's involved in Black Lives Matters or even the Proud Boys, any kind of organization that it doesn't feel it has total control over, the first thing they want to do is recruit somebody in that organization. They don't want to disrupt the organization. They want to get somebody inside who can tell them what the plans and strategies of that organization are. Okay? That was not particularly easy for the CIA to do. It was to actually get agents inside this secret government. They were very rarely able to do that. So by and large, what they tried to do was kidnap these people. And this is where, the reputation for Phoenix as a kidnapping and assassination program begins. Because they couldn't actually, these were really hardcore ideological people who were dedicated to fighting the Americans in South Vietnam. So it wasn't easy to turn them into double agents. And the few times that they did turn into double agents, they were generally triple agents who were pretending to, so there was this whole espionage war going on. And most Americans didn't speak Vietnamese, so they couldn't tell whether somebody was, pulling the wool over their eyes or not, including their allies in the South Vietnamese special police and stuff like that, okay, which is a problem they have around the world. But anyway, if they couldn't get somebody to turn or become an agent for them, then the next thing they would do is kidnap them. And they had special teams that were set up to do that. And they were called counter-terror teams. And they were mercenaries in the employ of the CIA. And very often they would dress like Viet Cong guerrillas. And these were often Viet Cong soldiers or North Vietnamese soldiers or criminals who had been let out of prison and went to work for the CIA. And these people had no connection. They were no connection at all to the insurgency. They were dead set against the insurgency, and by and large, they could be trusted. And these people would go out at night, or arrange other ways to get a person alone when he wasn't, expecting anything. They would kidnap them and they would put them in an interrogation center. Now, starting in 1965, and this is another important thing to remember in terms of Phoenix coming back to the United States. In 1965 in South Vietnam, 2 years before there was a Phoenix program, the CIA built what was called a province interrogation center. in every province in South Vietnam, in all 44 provinces. And these interrogation centers were, again, manned by the special branch of the South Vietnamese police. This was the FBI that the CIA created in South Vietnam, specifically to go after insurgents and people who were, trying to overthrow the government. And they built an interrogation center in every province. And once they kidnapped somebody, they would take them to the interrogation center. If people are interested, and I know you just read the book, I actually interviewed the guy, John Muldoon, who built them. He was a CIA, he was a CIA officer who told me how he went about doing this and why they did it and how these interrogation centers worked. And the CIA staffed them with professional interrogators, and these places became known as, torture centers, where people were just worked over and worked over and worked over. And I think my book is the only book that's been written about the Vietnam War that goes into the interrogation centers in any depth, simply because I had this CIA officer, John Muldoon, who I interviewed, tell me all about it. But otherwise, it's one of the CIA's most closely held secrets. Well, these interrogation centers are like laboratories to learn how to interrogate people also. The CIA doesn't just interrogate people, it keeps records on how you do it and what methods work best. And these are all like little laboratories where the CIA is always studying and videotaping and sending reports back to headquarters where, experts work it over, look it over and review it. And so the CIA really, in South Vietnam, perfects its interrogation techniques. It perfects building interrogation centers. And these become the model for all the black centers, black sites that the CIA starts building after 9/11 around the world. They're modeled exactly on this. They're built the same way, probably by the same companies, with the design the same way. And the interrogators all know, based on what happened in South Vietnam, the best ways of interrogating people. And one of the most favored means of interrogating people was the waterboarding. It happened everywhere all the time, and people learned that this was there in South Vietnam, that this was a really effective way of doing it. So then, once they had washed a person out in the interrogation centers, they would hand them over to the military, or they would send them to prison, or they just execute them, summarily kill them. And by 1969, the CIA had also helped build an interrogation center in every district in South Vietnam. That's 244 districts. So the interrogation center, that's like down to in every county in the United States. Every state would have an interrogation center in every county where they could send dissidents to be worked over. If they couldn't capture a person, then this is when they would assassinate them. And the same teams that did the kidnapping would do the assassinating. And lots of the assassination occurred during ambushes, waiting along, knowing where somebody was going to be at a particular time and just waiting for him and then killing him and everybody who was with him. So that, literally, they rarely caught somebody alone. And when they would assassinate somebody, they ended up assassinating everybody around them. So by the end of the war, the CIA said it had assassinated or killed 25,000 people. The South Vietnamese said they had killed around 40,000 people, okay, according to their records. But nobody was counting all the extra people. They were only counting the people that they targeted. And so the number, given the fact that dozens, in almost every instance, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 other people got killed. Sometimes they would drop a bomb on a village, hoping to get one of these people. So these assassination and kidnapping teams, which were considered the military didn't want anything to do with them in Vietnam, all right, because they were going after civilians. They compared it to the SS, the German SS. This is what the German SS was doing in World War II. They were going after partisans. They were going after the underground in France, in Greece, in any occupied country. This is what the SS was doing. They were going after the resistance, largely civilians, and this is what the Gestapo was doing. The Gestapo was going after civilian members of the resistance. Well, this is exactly what the Phoenix program was doing in South Vietnam. And the military, because it resembled the Gestapo and the SS, didn't want anything to do with it at first. Okay, they thought it violated the laws of warfare, and it did. And later on, Phoenix was accused of violating the Geneva Conventions, which guarantees protection to civilians during a time of war. But so because it was directed at civilians, it was the CIA's job. And so it took 2 years before the military started really assisting the CIA in this program. The military ostensibly took over in 1969. And by that point, military officers were starting to accept that this was the way, this was the role that the military was going to have to play in counterinsurgencies. And nowadays, these kidnapping and assassination teams are basically all that the military does anywhere around the world anymore. They don't have main force battles where they, fight. It's not like the Taliban are coming in from Pakistan in regiments and divisions with tanks like the North Vietnamese did. It's all guerrilla warfare now because nobody can fight the United States militarily and face to face. So that whole part of the military and its bag of tricks has become obsolete. And it took about 40 years for the military 30 years for the military to realize this. They realized that, in particular, by the time the war, right after 9/11, when the armies invaded Iraq and the military invaded Afghanistan, those were basically guerrilla wars. Also, in Iraq, it was largely an urban guerrilla warfare. But it was based exactly on what the Phoenix program was doing in South Vietnam. And people in 2002, 2003 started writing about it. People like Seymour Hersh saying this is the Phoenix program. I was writing about it before it happened, saying this is what's gonna happen. But I'm not in the mainstream. And it wasn't until people like Seymour Hersh started saying, well, this is the Phoenix program. But this is what happened. And the CIA and the military set up interrogation centers, just like they did in South Vietnam, throughout Iraq and throughout Afghanistan. Same thing. Okay. And they had these kidnapping and assassination teams that worked all through Afghanistan, still are in Afghanistan, still in Iraq and that whole region, Syria, all through that region. This is the way wars are conducted. It's the way wars are conducted in Africa. It's the way wars have been conducted in South and Central America since the 1970s. When the first place that Phoenix was exported to from South Vietnam was El Salvador in 1974, 1975. So that by the time the Iran-Contra, the Contra War starts, it's all Phoenix-style operations in El Salvador and Nicaragua. This is the way the military fights. It advises its allies, their paramilitary teams, to go out and get whoever is the leaders of the opposition in that country. And they attack the civilians. In Iraq, they had playing cards with the names and ranks of everybody in the Ba'ath Party, which they handed out. And there was rewards for all these people. They called it their high value rewards program to get people to inform. Well, that started in South Vietnam with the Phoenix program. The Phoenix program began a high value rewards program in 1969 because the best way to find out who the members were of this secret government was to put a bounty on their head. So they found, you'd get informants to, offer people to rat out their neighbors. And again, this is very important to know, because ever since the Department of Homeland Security was created here in the United States, first as the Office of Homeland Security in 2001, and then later it became a department. It went from an office in the White House, and then legislation was passed, and the Department of Homeland Security was created and spread throughout the United States. The main thing that the Department of Homeland Security does is it recruits informants all throughout the United States. And it does this in many, 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 many ways. It does through business. The businesses, what's called the critical infrastructure here in the United States. Critical infrastructure. The internet companies, the medical profession, oil companies, transportation companies, communication companies. They all work with the Department of Homeland Security. They all have outreach through, the Department of Homeland Security reaches out to every civic organization in the United States and gives them training in emergency preparedness and what to do in case there's, a problem here or a problem there. And they form relationships with all these business people who are worried that rioters will break their glass, their windows, things like that. It starts down at the very grassroots level. And all those people willingly work, property owners, businesses with big property, a lot of property, major corporations. They're the integral part of the Department of Homeland Security. And the first thing they do is they look out within their own business. They spy on people within their own companies to make sure that they look at their memorandum between each other in a hospital or at GE or for a paint company corporation in Pittsburgh. And if they see anything by surveilling the internal communications of people in all these companies, if they see anything that sets off a red flag, they tell the Department of Homeland Security. So that's how this sort of Phoenix blanket surveillance starts taking hold in the United States by the formation of the Department of Homeland Security, which, in order to assure security in the homeland, works with the people who have a stake in security. And those are largely business owners. And that's how it works at the very basic level, where those people are looking within their own organization for anybody who might be stepping out of line. And so there's many different ways that Phoenix comes back to roost in the United States. But largely, and most importantly, it's through the psychological warfare aspect, the way of trying to win people over to a cause through propaganda. And this was one of the main features of the Phoenix program in trying to get people to become informants in South Vietnam against the secret government. It was a very difficult thing to do because these were very committed people. It's not so much like here in the United States, where there is no cohesive, unified national resistance that works underground and is trying to overthrow the government. We don't have that. But they had that in South Vietnam. So they were trying to, again, just like they learned interrogation techniques in these interrogation centers, they also learned how to convince people to change sides. They learned to convince people how to defect, how to how to work on them psychologically to wear them down, so they would not want to continue fighting. All these sorts of psychological warfare techniques were also developed in South Vietnam through the Phoenix program, which by 1970, and I have the documents, that put them up, the Phoenix program was the #1 psychological warfare operation in South Vietnam, simply because it knew who everybody was, had documentation on what their beliefs were, just like through the internet companies. Anybody who's on Google, they know every damn thing about you. I mean, if you like Nike sneakers, Nike advertisements show up on your iPhone 14 times a day, just like they knew everything, on a very primitive level in South Vietnam about people. And they were using that information to try to get them to turn against the insurrection. Here in the United States, nowadays, they know everything about who you are. They're mostly trying to get you to buy consumer products. They know what your demographic is, and the companies that sell you things know which buttons to push in order. There's a new line of hiking gear out. And if you like LL Bean and you like healthy, walking in the woods, then boom, this tells you to buy your new raincoat. Well, at the same time, on a more subtle psychological warfare level, messages are being communicated to everybody in the United States by the various political parties again, depending on your demographics, to get you to support the Democrats or the Republicans or Biden or Trump. And again, all this is very well coordinated. It's very sophisticated, and it's designed to assure that nobody tries to overthrow the government of the United States. That's what Homeland Security is maintaining a very careful balance of people on the left, on the right, the Proud Boys, Antifa, all the different groups, monitoring them and their members, and following them and where they go, knowing who they talk to, trying to get the people that they talk to influence them to go particular directions, trying to recruit these people over to the government, even if they don't know that they're being recruited, by setting up, through the Department of Homeland Security, groups that appear to be right-wing militias, groups that appear to be affiliated with Black Lives Matter, doing all these sorts of very tricky, subtle, suggestive kinds of things to try and move people so that they can get absolutely control all the political and social movements here in the United States, which they virtually do. And what you have is the Democratic Party brand of American fascism fighting the Republican brand of American fascism, and both using whatever kind of psychological warfare they can, directed against their own demographic, to keep them in line. And nobody ever, like I was saying to you, ever sees on the major media, is never exposed to any kind of Marxist-Leninist analysis of what is going on. Bernie Sanders, makes a little effort at that. health care for everybody. But according to the United States government, that's insurrection. that's revolution. I mean, doing away with insurance companies. I mean, that's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. So you can't do away with that. So people can't have health care, and thus you have a crisis like COVID, where other countries have not had a COVID crisis because they have health care for everybody. You don't have to worry about it. Certainly they have health. The only people who get health care here in the United States, basically, are Donald Trump and senators and congressmen. Everybody else, unless you're a millionaire, has to wonder, where am I going to get my health care? And so a pandemic, a crisis like COVID, becomes a tool of psychological warfare in the United States because people are off balance. And it seems like the government is actually using this virus as a weapon against the people. And they are. Because nowhere is the solution to this problem, which is national health care, good health care for everybody, a smaller defense budget, taking money from the American empire, the military aspect of the American empire, bases, 800 bases around the world, taking money away from that and giving it to healthcare. Nowhere is that ever presented as a solution. The dialogue is so limited here in the United States that solutions are impossible. And so it's very easy for the government. It doesn't even have to create a crisis from COVID, like COVID. All it has to do is keep everybody off balance through the crisis. And it just maintains this stasis between Democrat and Republican. I know I've been talking at length, but if you watched the Pence-Harris debate, they're both for fracking. They're both for more funding for police and prisons. They're both for maintaining or increasing the military budget. Nobody is offering any relief for the American people. And at the same time, this Phoenix program, which has been brought back to the United States, which is it's why the Phoenix program was called the Phoenix program. Phoenix is a mythological bird that sees everything. It's omnipotent, like God, the Phoenix. It sees everybody and everything, and it was used as a symbol in South Vietnam to try and scare the insurgents, to try to make them give up the insurgency. The Phoenix is watching us. It knows what we're going to do. We're ineffectual. Well, that's what's happened here. Everybody knows there's round-the-clock surveillance, and everybody feels. And this is the main purpose of the psychological warfare, is to suppress everybody spiritually. If you know that there's blanket surveillance, if you know that every time you turn on your iPhone, your favorite product line is going to show up, you think to yourself, well, what can I do in the face of this kind of, omnipotence of the government? And that is what we're facing, a spiritual battle where the United States government treats its own people as if they were occupying a foreign country. And this is the analysis that any Marxist-Leninist would tell you is what's happening. That the United States treats is an empire, and it treats labor overseas the same way it treats labor here. It doesn't. It wrings more out of labor overseas. Through agreements with China or so any other country where it has trade agreements and and cheap labor is available for American corporations, which have expanded overseas. But at the same time, the attitude towards American workers is no different. Keep on, keep them struggling. Make sure that rent is more than you can afford, so that poor people are competing with each other for jobs and for housing. Whereas if you had a Marxist-Leninist government, this is the first, like in Cuba, despite all the sanctions on Cuba, or Venezuela, where they're also trying to work for the average person. The first thing you get are medical rights. You get access to healthcare, as you do in Scandinavian countries, as you do, you get housing is considered a human right. The government makes sure that you have affordable housing. These things are considered obligations of the government. Not so here. And that's because of the effectiveness of the propaganda of this psychological warfare operation that's being waged against America. They're told that you have that sign behind you. Liberty begins with you. And they're telling you that if the government provides you with a guaranteed housing and with guaranteed health care, you're not free. You're not an American. You're not a real American. You're only a real American unless you're willing to risk your own health and your family's safety and security for a dream of becoming a billionaire. So anyway, understanding Phoenix and how it comes home involves all these various aspects. It's the model for the fusion centers, the Phoenix program here in the United States. Phoenix was set up based on what were called Intelligence Operations Coordinating Centers, IOCs, IOCC. And there was a Phoenix IOC in every district. That's 244 districts in South Vietnam. That's 244 DIOCs. And there was an IOC, a Phoenix Intelligence Coordination and Operations Center in every province, a PIOC. Well, those become the Department of Homeland Security fusion centers, which do the same thing. These intelligence operations coordinating centers in South Vietnam brought together every military, civilian, and police organization in South Vietnam and coordinated and computerized all their operations in search for this secret government and individuals involved in this secret government. Coordinated all the intelligence and all the operations. And when, after 9/11, it was thought that the Muslims were going to invade America, the Department of Homeland Security set up what was called a fusion center. They didn't call them IOCs, but it's the same thing. A fusion center in every state to coordinate every military, police, and civilian organization that in any way had anything to do with detecting amongst the civilian population anybody who might be a threat in any conceivable way. And so that's how the whole blanket surveillance works, and that's how the Department of Homeland Security in every state acts as the coordinating center for all that intelligence, and also all the informants. It coordinates all the informant information so that it can share it with the FBI, so that it can share it with the CIA, so that it can share it with the Portland Police Department in Oregon. It just has every piece of information about everybody, and it works primarily to conduct this kind of psychological warfare against the American people, to keep them down and keep them from organizing and keeping them from understanding in any way, shape, or form what their own self-interests could possibly be if the government was ever able to, if they were ever able to get this police state off their backs and this military empire off their backs, what the American people might do. But as it stands right now, they're just so weighted down by military propaganda, by police and surveillance, and even the surveillances of every camera, of a business camera on every corner. Every time you walk into a store, somebody's photographing you. You can't go to a demonstration while 40 people with iPhones taking pictures of you. People think, well, oh, this is great because it can show police brutality. Well, at the same time, they're identifying every protester. And then once they know who your name is, they know who all your friends are too. And they can squeeze you in a million ways. And this threat just looms over American society. It's just this massive weight pushing it down. I don't know how else to explain it, but that's the 45-minute lecture.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the questions I gave before we started the interview, you pretty much answered. And let me see. One of the scary parts of the coming home to roost was discovering, it was reported some years ago, of black sites in Chicago. So, this is not happening in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, where in Chicago they have black sites where Americans were renditioned illegally, not arrested, tortured, and even killed. And I'm from Chicago, so this black site was not far from where I grew up. So these types of things are shocking. And as you kind of gave us this big overview, I guess one of my final questions would be, do you feel that, as you said, they've weaponized COVID, and now they're talking about bringing in all of these additional surveillance, biosecurity apparatuses? Do you see that the whole pandemic situation, like 9/11, in some ways may advance further this surveillance, Homeland Security apparatus? And then, what do you see for the future? Are we going to be living in some brave new world, Orwellian, totalitarian police state? Is it already here? How bad can that get?
Well, for me, the way I understand it and the way I see it, having been steeped in all this for 35 years, is not like the way other people see it. I mean, it's epistemology. I have an environment, a mental environment that because of being steeped in the CIA and the DEA and police and psychological warfare, I don't see how it can get any worse. To me, it's everything is already in place. So that when something like this happens with COVID, it's simply managing it. Okay, well, what difference would it make now if everybody had a chip in their head? I mean, they already have a metaphorical chip in their head from being propagandized. You don't actually need a figurative, a material chip in your head. If you want to get rid of the chip in your head, you got to get out of the propaganda, and shed that and start finding out factual ways to view the situation, and a good step is to get off the internet, and start reading books and organizing with people face to face. And I think that if COVID is doing anything that benefits the powers that be, the powers that control us, it's by teaching us, by separating us from each other more and more. It's this psychological distancing that's stressing us all out. I mean, it really I feel the stress, of the lack of human contact, and at the same time, China has no more COVID cases. How can other countries have wiped it out and the United States not. So it suggests to me that, and I particularly blame this on Trump and the current Republican administration, is that they are keeping the COVID pandemic going as a way of further alienating people from one another. It's, going back to Guy Debord and the Society of the Spectacle, and making people reify themselves in consumer goods, being more dependent on Amazon. What can I get to make my life worthwhile when I can't be with other people? Well, I got to go to Amazon, or I got to look on the internet, where I don't know if anybody's telling me the truth or lying to me. So it just creates a more malleable, subservient population. And I don't think that the government created COVID. These things happen, but they certainly have managed it to further fragment and fracture American society, and that makes it more manageable. I don't know what's going to happen after the election, but the future does not bode well in either case. The only thing that would help at this point in time, and I'm not suggesting, I happen to believe that people should to take precautions during this pandemic in the United States. Wear a mask, social distance, but in the meantime, make plans with people so that in the future we can be like the Viet Cong. We can create an infrastructure that works mouth to mouth, mouth to ear, without being part of this, that somehow can be outside this surveillance state. And so that people can learn to love one another and seek other people out, people who might have different views. And so that everybody everybody who's not a billionaire or part of the political class or in the upper 1%, where life is going to be good no matter what happens, everybody else should just try to get together on a very personal level, apart from the internet, apart from stupid disagreements, the kind of disagreements that you see flaring up on Reddit or Facebook, where people just battle each other for no reason. They're just being trained on social media to fight each other and to stand up for stupid reasons, to back stupid causes, and for people to start really trying to break free of that, to get out of this burdensome psychological warfare, and to start using this pandemic to see that the way out, when the virus is behind us and it's safe to work together, to just try to connect with each other on a very human basis. And that's the only means of redemption for America now. For the only salvation is to get down to this sort of one-to-one in-person communication level of really just trying to understand each other and love each other and help each other out in a very organic, earthly way. And how the hell does anybody do that? I don't know. It's everybody's got to want to do it, and maybe the pandemic will have a sort of a counterintuitive effect in the long run, that we really do need each other, and we need each other's emotional support. and that rather than fighting each other and arming ourselves, and throwing Molotov cocktails at each other, and either metaphorically on the internet or in real life in demonstrations, to follow like to me the example of really the Black Lives Matter people who stress nonviolence, who stress raising your consciousness, understanding yourself and other people better and more intimately, to follow that path and to see if that can lead us somewhere. Because God knows the path of consumer society and endless growth, is just leading to the destruction of our own climate and environment.
As you mentioned about people going to Amazon, for me, instead of purchasing something on Amazon, I'd rather, spend my time talking to someone like Doug Valentine. And I think that's a much more useful way of spending our time, and for other people to listen to this. And as well as you mentioned, wear our masks. I like the mask V for Vendetta you have behind you. I have one too. So I wear that mask.
Yeah, I have my mask there. Yeah. I might, if they let the kids out on Halloween, I might greet them at the door with my vendetta. hand out revolutionary literature to the little kids instead of Hershey bars.
And your solution as well, it's overlapped with many of the previous guests that I've had, and a lot of them are saying the same thing, talking to people, talking to your neighbors, and forming, groups that we don't have to always be connected with our WhatsApp and Facebook. And I kind of don't like, I use it because of the podcast, but otherwise I like to live in the real world. And if you have any other final thought for us, and as well, I think your main website is douglasvalentine.com, and you're on Twitter, so people should bookmark that site, should go out and get your books. So if you have any final thought for us, or any other website or project you want us to know about.
No, just douglasvalentine.com, and people can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. I use Facebook to try to sell books. I use Twitter to try to sell books. I'm a writer. It's what I do. So, I want to sell my books. So, like you said, they can be helpful if you're self-employed and you have a business, but like anything, you have to be clear-eyed about it, and you have to be rational about it. And you can't lose yourself into Facebook, or you can't lose yourself into Twitter to the exclusion, of like going to the library and reading books and trying to educate yourself on matters, like you say, the real world. So maybe the country's reaching a tipping point, and maybe the COVID will, if there's anything good that can come out of it, just raise awareness amongst people about how much we really do need each other in a personal, intimate way, and to try to put value on that, more and a greater value on that, contributing to each other's well-being than all the other things that are going on.
All right. I know I usually recommend my guests' books, but I did just purchase the Phoenix Program book and your newer book on the CIA as organized crime, which I haven't read yet, but I'm going to start reading. But I do really recommend Doug Valentine's books, because I don't think there's almost no one talking about that's really dug deep on the Phoenix Program. And as you explained to us in this interview, it has a lot of impact. It impacts all of our lives. Like I mentioned, I'm from Chicago. They have the black site there near to my home, which, as you explained, has its history back in the Phoenix Program in Vietnam. And so thank you again for being with us, Mr. Valentine.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for letting me ramble for 45 minutes straight.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast and interview. I would like to remind you that our website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list that goes out each weekend with the latest podcast and a long collection of important news headlines. It's good to sign up for the newsletter in case we experience censorship and deplatforming. You can help the Geopolitics and Empire podcast by subscribing to and interacting with all of our channels such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Gab, Minds, and Steemit. You can also help us by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms such as iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, Spreaker, and so on. Finally, if you value our work and our mission and would like to see us continue interviewing experts from across the political spectrum, please consider leaving a one-time donation via PayPal or Bitcoin, or becoming a regular monthly supporter on our Patreon. All the links can be found on geopoliticsandempire.com. Thanks for listening.